If you've ever passed by open fields or rural roads, you've probably noticed one thing that keeps popping up: barns that are almost always painted red. It's such a familiar sight that most of us don't even question it anymore. But that simple color choice actually has a deeper story behind it, shaped by practicality, chemistry, and history. What seems like a tradition is really the result of smart decisions made by farmers centuries ago. Today we're diving into why barns are red and how something as simple as paint became a lasting symbol of rural life, right here on History of Simple Things. Let's go back a few centuries, long before modern paints and coatings existed. Farmers had a serious problem. How do you protect wooden buildings from the elements? Barns, in particular, were exposed to rain, snow, heat, and constant humidity. Without protection, wood would rot, warp, or become infested with insects. Paint today is easy, you just buy a can, but back then it was expensive and not widely available. Farmers needed something they could make themselves using simple, accessible materials. So instead of buying paint, they improvised. They created their own protective coating using whatever they had on hand. And this is where the color red starts to enter the story. Early farmers discovered that they could preserve wood by mixing a kind of homemade paint. One of the key ingredients in this mixture was linseed oil, a byproduct of flaxseed processing, which acted as a natural sealant. To strengthen it, they mixed the linseed oil with iron oxide, essentially rust, which was cheap and widely available. This combination created a durable coating that helped protect the wood from moisture and decay. Iron oxide is basically rust, and it turns out rust has a very strong reddish color. When mixed into paint, it produced a deep, earthy red shade. But the color wasn't the main goal. The real advantage was durability. Iron oxide acted as a natural preservative. It helped kill mold, prevent fungal growth, and protect the wood from decay. Compared to other pigments available at the time, iron oxide was also incredibly abundant and cheap. Farmers could easily source it from the ground or nearby deposits. So the choice wasn't really about aesthetics, it was about survival. Red paint just happened to be the most practical option. Out of all the possible colors farmers could have used, red stood out for a few key reasons. First, it was affordable. Other pigments, especially brighter or lighter colors, required more refined materials and were often expensive. Second, red paint was surprisingly effective at protecting wood. The iron oxide didn't just color the paint, it strengthened it. It made the coating thicker, more resistant to weather, and longer lasting. Third, red barns were easier to maintain. Even when the paint faded over time, it still looked relatively consistent. Other colors might show wear and damage more clearly, but red aged more gracefully. So over time, farmers kept choosing red, not because it looked nice, but because it worked better than anything else they could make. By the late 1800s and early 1900s, industrial paint production became more common. Farmers no longer had to mix their own paint. They could simply buy it. But here's the interesting part. Even when new colors became available, red remained the most popular choice. Why? Because red paint was still the cheapest. Manufacturers continued using iron oxide as a pigment because it was abundant and easy to produce. That kept the cost low compared to other colors like white, blue, or green, which required more expensive ingredients like zinc or lead compounds. So even as technology advanced, the economic advantage of red paint kept it dominant. It wasn't just tradition at this point, it was still the most practical option. Eventually, something interesting happened. What started as a practical decision slowly turned into a cultural tradition. Generations of farmers grew up seeing red barns, so when it came time to build their own, they stuck with what was familiar. Red barns became part of the rural identity, almost a symbol of farming life itself. Even when cost stopped being a major factor, the tradition stuck. People expected barns to be red. It became a visual shorthand for agriculture, hard work, and countryside living. At that point, the color wasn't just functional anymore, it was iconic. There's also a small scientific benefit often mentioned. Red paint may help barns absorb heat slightly better than lighter colors. In colder climates, this could help warm the structure a bit during the day. However, this effect is relatively minor and probably wasn't the main reason barns were painted red. The real driving forces were cost, availability, and durability, not temperature control. Still, it's an interesting bonus that adds another layer to the story. So why are barns red? It all comes down to a mix of necessity and practicality. Early farmers needed a cheap, effective way to protect their buildings, and iron oxide-based paint gave them exactly that. It was affordable, durable, and easy to make, everything they needed. Over time, that practical choice turned into a lasting tradition. Even as better options became available, the image of the red barn was already deeply rooted in culture. Today, when you see a red barn standing in the middle of a field, you're not just looking at a building. You're looking at a piece of history, a solution born out of resourcefulness that became a symbol recognized around the world. And all of it started with something as simple as rust. Thank you for watching. If you have suggestions for our next video, feel free to share them in the comments below. We'll be sure to give you an acknowledgement for your contribution. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the history of simple things. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories woven through the smallest details.